Morning, everyone. It is Monday, March 15th. This is a meeting of the Planning, Housing, and Economic Development Committee. And we are taking up the Shady Grove Minor Master Plan. And this is our second meeting on this. So we're going to resume where we left off. And we're joined by a number of officials from planning and county government. So Pam, why don't you take us away?
Great. Good morning. Thank you. So where we stopped last time was partially through what is a neighborhood called the transition area in the plan. So we have a property to cover there, and then other neighborhoods and areas to cover. I did want to just mention that at the last work session, we had covered the properties that included WMATA-owned land, and that the committee had asked that if WMATA representatives could be available to answer or talk about any questions related to the plan. I'll turn it to planning staff. I don't know if the WMATA folks are here, and has questions or wants to cover anything related to that before we start moving into new material.
So we've reached out to WMATA. We should have Nina Alpert as well as Stephen with Metro on the call as well.
Yeah, we're both on, Nina Albert and Stephen Segerlin. Thank you.
Great. All right, welcome. Well, your properties here are a big piece of the puzzle, and we were very excited to hear during our deliberations about the WMATA incentive that you thought this potentially opens the door to, some more some faster movement and maybe some better movement than you could have had. So we're interested to hear from you just about your requests. Does the plan reflect what you think you need, and any comments you want to make about how we are proceeding?
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Councilmember Reamer, for giving us an opportunity and inviting us. I really believe that it's important for Metro to be participating in conversations like this, particularly when it pertains to TOD. So thanks for considering us. So at Shady Grove, yes, we are very much in favor of the minor master plan amendment work that MNC-PBC has been doing. We, in fact, studied Shady Grove ourselves to try and understand how to move our own facilities around. Just as background, Shady Grove has one of the largest parking counts in the entire metro system, with about 5,300 parking spaces. And so we really try to understand, do we need, and parking's just one of many different types of transit facilities. Bus is another type of transit facility. So we study each site, work closely with the local jurisdictions on understanding, for example, okay, if BRT is going to come into Shady Grove, how do we make sure that the site is planned to accommodate the growth or changes in transit needs over time. And so we had done that, shared those plans with MNC-PBC as well as Montgomery County DOT and others to make sure that these types of planning is integrated and thoughtful. So the plan that you guys, the MNC-PBC has presented to the PHED committee incorporates what we had studied. In terms of development of Shady Grove, one of the major goals that we had in our planning effort was two or threefold. The first was really to understand what the market dynamics are and what rents are. As you can anticipate, they are not the strongest in the region. They're fine, but not strong enough to overcome what is approximately $100 million worth of infrastructure costs on Metro property itself. So just to give some clear feedback on, just because it's an end-of-line station, it just happens to be extraordinarily expensive. So the incentive helps. We still have yet to figure out when we just, we can do it. We just haven't turned our attention yet to Shady Grove specifically as to how much and what it could encourage. But overarching goals, back to that, was to see if we could break down the site and offer it in smaller pieces so that somebody didn't have to develop the whole thing at once. because that's when you start to incur that extraordinary cost. So what is an implementation plan? And we think that, a combination of making the north and east side of the station more accessible for people to park will draw people away from the west side, or at least it'll become a viable alternative for people to park on the east side, because from a development standpoint, the west side, which is closest to 355, is probably the most logical site to develop earlier. So that's one thing that the planning effort did for us. And again, the plans that MNC PPC had or are proposing incorporates some of our thought process, or at least is very much in line with it. And then the other was really to identify, again, how do we move people around so that both sides of, like the parking naturally wants to happen on the east side. That's, but it's not easily accessible for people to get to the east side. So we started to look at, how could you really encourage people to drive and park on the east side where there's a lot more room to develop parking garages. So I hope that that's a helpful sort of overview of our, of how we've been working together to date, and then also some of the thought process about how to get moving. There are a lot of opportunities in Montgomery County for metro development, and I think that we would hold Shady Grove because it has so much land that we could actually, if we were strategic in hanging on to it for the right opportunity, you could also, it's a great site for potentially an anchor tenant of some sort. So to make it available generally as we market our properties, but really look for that catalyst that could help overcome some of the underlying costs. Because I think if we waited for the natural market to occur, it would just take some time.
You mean by an anchor tenant?
Any kind of anchor tenant, actually. But somebody that's kind of a, White Flint, Greenbelt, Shady Grove, and Branch Avenue for Metro are the four sort of kind of key properties that we have that have a lot of flexibility because of the size that they are. And I'll just give an example of an anchor tenant. I mean, Amazon obviously comes to mind. Those four metro stations were the four that we just said, hey, here's immediate opportunities that for if somebody wanted to really rearrange or customize how how a campus might feel or a mixed use development, there's just a lot of flexibility given the size of these properties. Mm-hmm. So that's how we think of Shady Grove, is as a unique opportunity to be able to offer a tenant that or user or developer. I mean, all those three words are interchangeable, who had kind of a unique opportunity that could overcome some of the inherent infrastructure costs. I don't know if that's helpful background.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's great. I'd love to hear some comments from planning on Shady Grove and the metro sites. Anything you'd like to say, Carrie? I see you're on screen, or Nkosi?
Sure thing. Carrie Sanders, Chief Mid-County Planning. We've really enjoyed working with Nina and Stephen on this project, but also on other metro stations. WMATA's looking at White Flint. I know they're doing some studies on Wheaton. So we're really happy that they've given so much analysis and kind of attention to those red line stations. I think that obviously to kind of hit on Nina's point about focusing on the west side of the station, I think that's strategic and we understand that. I don't think the sector plan needs to go into the detail about the parking arrangements. I think that's something that can happen through the development review process. But yeah, we obviously would love to see development happen on the WMATA site other than parking, but we understand her point about how we have to be strategic and kind of phase these things. So our preference would be to certainly continue to work with AMADA through the development review process, but maybe not get into that level of detail in the sector plan itself. So happy to hear from Nkosi as well. I see he has his camera
on. Good morning, all. The only thing I would add is that it was in terms of what we've done in the plan is really create an envelope for Metro to take advantage of the land use and zoning recommendations in the draft plan and what the council staff had recommended in the first work session in terms of adding a bit more potential development intensity for the west side that really provide a greater flexibility for that future development partner to work with Metro to leverage that opportunity, whatever that anchor tenant or tenants may be in the future in terms of the additional height, additional FAR, and also to create the space, the type of place that we envisioned from the plan perspective in terms of a livable environment with open spaces, etc.
Right. Well, I guess I want to just put a point on this because I know the community is very concerned about getting development going there, and there's a real strong interest in creating a place at the Shady Grove Metro and the surrounding areas that provides a higher quality of life and, you know, amenities and jobs and walkability. Creates a downtown Shady Grove essentially around the Metro. And the incentive that we created puts enough funding on the table that I'm hopeful we can actually deliver on that with one of the largest property owners in the whole area, which is WMATA. And absent that, I think it's very clear that there really isn't a solution financially for the $100 million infrastructure cost associated with all of those properties. And even with the incentive, you know, we don't know how those numbers all come together and so forth. But I think it opens the door to having something happening at scale in Shady Grove. And without it, I think this plan, you know, would potentially founder for a lot longer, you know, and I think there's a lot of community expectations that we do a plan like this and we should get some results. I think we will get some results on the privately owned property, but the Metro, you know, is a major property owner right at the heart of the whole sector plan area. And now we have the ability, I'm hoping that Metro can really do something that will make people happy and feel like, you know, what their expectations will be fulfilled. So Nina, can you talk about your timeline just a bit, please?
Yeah, so I mean, Shady Grove, of the, 9 metro stations that we have, we saw in the county was one that was farther out in the delivery. I mean, there's, we have to unfortunately prioritize stations just given generally resources, and then also how the market absorbs, development. So I think that what would probably make some sense is for us to collaboratively work together with the county on what I call an implementation plan. What are these bite-sized pieces that accomplishes what you just referenced, which is, a development such as Shady Grove is it's complicated. I mean, I don't want to be vanilla about it. It's expensive and it's complicated, but it doesn't preclude being able to create a sense of place, being able to create an environment and investments that catalyze. And so I think that what we should do is, and this is what we've been doing at White Flint, because there's already sort of an infrastructure, a feedback and a stakeholder infrastructure to begin these dialogues and really sort out, because building a pedestrian and bicycle network is a lot cheaper than building, a 1,000 space parking garage. I mean, those are just at completely different scales. Right. So there are ways to right now start aligning and coordinating activities so that we are really well set up. And again, I think that on the west side of the metro station, if we could start encouraging people to park on the other side with the existing facilities we have, That means that certain road infrastructure needs to be improved. I forgot, Stephen, what is the name of that street? It's like Redland. Yeah, Redland. Like, there would need to be improvements, but those kinds of improvements are a lot cheaper and easier. And then that starts to free up and encourage people, get people off of the property on the west side. And those are the most developable. And frankly, where you will get biggest bang for the buck. And then I think pedestrian improvements from the surrounding neighborhoods on the east side or the north, however you look at it, making it walkable for people through our metro property is another much cheaper and much more immediate benefit. And and I think that there's kind of a whole variety of interim activation concepts that we could also talk about. So again, get those benefits so people start to develop a sense of place around the metro station, a set of activities that occur, while, we come up with a more robust, and then in the implementation planning, let's also study what the real opportunity is with the tax abatement that you just passed and really understand those economics now.
It's a great idea. I really would love to take you up on that. Let's follow up on an implementation task force or committee.
Yep.
And I think it might also help drive some urgency with the bus depot relocation potentially, but we're talking about the metro property here as well. But yeah, I think that's terrific. It takes a concerted effort by the county government to make things happen, and Shady Grove should really be a high priority for us. There's just incredible potential, and you look around the region and you see what jurisdictions are doing with their metro stations. I think sometimes we're underperforming, so we could do a lot more here. And now that we have this incentive to work with, I think it can accelerate some of that. So, all right, good follow up. Thank you. Okay, thank you for being here. Appreciate that, Pam. We can continue, and again, thanks to Metro for your work.
Thank you so much for having us.
Great. Thank you. Okay. So now we will move into the staff report that was prepared for today. The one online, I think they are all together, but the first part of it on page 1 starts with what is titled at the top 1A. And again, this goes through the remaining land use and zoning recommendations in the plan. It will then cover everything else related to environmental recommendations and facilities, things like that. So where we left off last time, we are now looking at the Grove. It's a 16-acre traditional neighborhood shopping center. It is located at the northeast quadrant of Shady Grove Road and Crabs Branch Way. There's also a vacant 4-acre wooded property with stormwater management pond located in this area, and a linear 1.82-acre wooded property owned by the county, which consists of a stream and trees and is located north of the shopping center. The plan recommends a modest rezoning for this property, and that will help promote hopefully some mixed-use development on the site if there is any redevelopment. There are recommendations to establish a network of short blocks and internal streets, a sidewalk, provide a 3/4 acre neighborhood green. There is recommendation to retain some of the wooded area to mitigate noise from adjacent roads, incorporate a broad range of building types, and then rezone the county-owned small property to be consistent with another property that is across the right-of-way. And looking closely at these different recommendations, council staff supports the recommendations made by the planning board for the Grove Shopping Center site.
Good. I've got the plan up on my screen right now, so if anyone is signaling, might be helpful if you text me if you'd like to speak. But this one has seemed non-controversial. I'm guessing we can keep moving. Great.
Okay. The next is the area of the plan is termed the Shady Grove Road Corridor. It traverses the planning area from Mid-County Highway to the city limits of Gaithersburg and Rockville. There are several properties along this corridor. One of them is the CarMax property that was annexed by the city of Gaithersburg in 2012. The sector plan proposes residential and non-residential development along this corridor and divides the corridor as it does with for its recommendations into 3 areas: the Shady Grove Plaza, a vacant Casey-owned property, and an area that includes a U.S. Postal Service Center, CarMax site just mentioned, and another vacant property. With respect to the Shady Grove Plaza, the plan recommends some modest changes in zoning. Again, these are meant to take an area that has multiple property boundaries, give it more consistent zoning that allows for mixed-use development, and is really about consistency and hoping that something occurs here, and is also something that can provide some sustainable environmental redevelopment.
Pam, can we put up a map while you walk through?
Sure.
I don't know if Nkosi could provide that, or Carrie.
Nkosi,
or
is that possible for you to do
Whoever
that?
has it.
I was going to pull up the master plan, but if Nkosi, do you have a better map you want to share?
If you got it, Pam, probably.
Okay, I can do it quickly. Let me just see what page we're on. Okay.
I tell you what, you can also remind us what page you're on in the plan.
Page 57 in the plan.
All right, that's probably good. I think those who are watching at home can pull up the plan, or from their office.
Okay, is this helpful? I can't always tell exactly what everyone's seeing when I share my screen. Oh, why is it doing that?
Pam, I do have highlights from the plan if you want me to pull that up as well.
Okay. Is my screen showing?
Yeah.
Master plan. Okay. So this is, right. This is the current zoning here. I go back a page where you can see there is employment office zoning, general retail zoning, and commercial residential zoning on the property. And what the planning board has recommended is going in and doing more consistent zoning with slightly higher intensity zoning at the very corner of Shady Grove Road and MD 355. The one part of this that is, so this is for the Shady Grove Plaza. There is a recommendation within this, though, that is to rezone the King Buick and the Mitsubishi properties. They are included within this overall view. And there was testimony received about those 2 properties. The council received testimony from Miles and Stockbridge on behalf of EYA. EYA says that they support the sector plan's recommendations with regard to the property, with the exception of the residential zoning on the property. The plan recommends a total density of 1.5 FAR and a residential of 1 FAR. And EYA has requested that the residential FAR be increased to 1.5 to equal the total FAR being proposed for the property. In the meantime, the council has also received an annexation proposal from the city of Rockville for these properties. And the city has commented on this slight increase in residential zoning, and they support it. You might ask, well, why? Anybody watching who's not familiar might say, well, if the property will be annexed into Rockville, does it matter what the zoning is that the council puts on it today after it's annexed? But it retains its zoning for 5 years after annexation. So if the property owner has requested the slight increase in residential and the city is in line with that, and they see this as a benefit to the city of Rockville's development in the neighboring area, council staff supports that slight increase.
Yeah, I agree. And I'll see if my colleagues have any questions, but as a general rule, I think that annexation is problematic for the county. I think there's a clear reason why municipalities like it, because new development is generally a profit-making enterprise for the municipality, and because they don't have to provide the full cost of the services. But I think in this case, this is a split-zoned property, and it wouldn't be right to require the developer to go through 2 separate planning processes. So that's why we're contemplating annexation here. And I think the city will do a terrific job with this. So if we can provide a little additional, entitlement, then they'll be able to work with that through their process. So good. I can't see any. I don't know if anyone wants
Just
to
to say, I
Yeah.
agree, and we contemplated this and discussed it a bit during the growth and infrastructure policy, and so I think this is
We did.
really the kind of next step to that discussion that we already had, somewhat in depth during that process. So I would agree with your comments and with the recommendation.
All right. Keep going.
Mr. Chairman, if I could.
Yeah. Mr. District Council Member, former mayor.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. Though I don't necessarily agree with every word you said about
I
annexation.
figured you might not, but I'm going to work on you.
Just wanted to throw that one out. Though I do agree with the part that you were talking about on this. I do believe it's sensible and reasonable that the city of Rockville, that this would be one piece of property in the city of Rockville and not be split. So I thank you for those words. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
I'm fine, and I'm fine with it as well.
Terrific. All right, let's keep going.
Okay, the next property is the vacant Casey. Shoot, where is it? The vacant Casey property. I can get this on my screen without making everybody dizzy. It's located just north of I-370. It does border the city limits of Gaithersburg, and it is within the city's maximum expansion limits. And the request for rezoning to it is relatively minor. It's going from an employment office zone of 0.75 FAR to a CRT zoning. And then there's a recommendation to maintain some of the existing wooded area to help with environmental goals in the plan. Down here and see if we can show this. It's this property here, and it's just a slight change in zoning. Council staff supports this recommendation. Okay, keep going.
Keep going, yeah.
The next is the U.S. Postal Service Center, CarMax, and there's a slight vacant property all in one area, quite a large area. It's 39.4 acres. There is an existing stream of wetland on the vacant property. It constrains its full development. The sector plan has recommended that a fire rescue station be potentially considered in the future for the vacant property. It's at Shady Grove Road and 355. The city of Rockville weighed in on the potential for the fire rescue in this location. They requested, if possible, an alternative location for the fire rescue be found, as they wanted. They like to think that in the future, in the long term, it could be a gateway into the city of Rockville. Although the county executive also weighed in support of retaining the recommendation that if there is a future need for the fire rescue, that it be on this property. They support that contention. And given the location of the vacant property to the transfer station, which no one sees really leaving anytime in even the long term, it makes sense that we consider and support the planning board recommendation for the fire rescue on the property. It's unlikely that there will be residential development located this close to the transfer station. And fire rescue would be a great second use for that vacant property.
Okay. So this is owned by U.S. It's a combination of different private owners?
It's 4 different properties. Yeah, it's different. This is the one of the vacant is the one that we're talking about for the fire rescue. But there's also a postal service center, which is just having a reconfirmation of its zoning. And then there's the CarMax, which was annexed into the city of Gaithersburg.
Okay. Sounds good.
Any questions? Okay. The next neighborhood is Upper Mill Creek. It's a very large 54-acre area. It consists of 3 properties that are east of the railroad tracks, north of Shady Grove Road, west of Crabs Branch Way, and they are bisected by I-370. The first property is the county's Division of Fleet Management, Equipment Maintenance, and Operations Center. There's also the Maryland Transportation Authority that's built a new police station, administrative offices there next to the ICC. And then there's Roberts Oxygen, which is a distributor of compressed industrial, medical, and specialty gases, located just north of the fleet management property. And the plan's recommendations for these are relatively modest. They are slight changes in zoning to make it consistent with the update to the zoning ordinance rewrite or confirmation of their existing employment office zoning. So council staff supports these recommendations in the plan.
All right. Good.
The next section is a section of the plan that discusses the plan development zone. There are a handful of these throughout the plan area. PD zones, plan development zones were put down through local map amendments. When the zoning code was rewritten, these zones were not translated into new zones because they are slightly more complicated to look at. We usually look at what is existing on the ground, translate them into something that is consistent with how they've been developed and built. And so the recommendation that the rewrite was that each master plan, as it is considered and looked at, will look at those PD zones and will recommend consistent zoning with the new zoning code. And that's what they've done with this plan. And council staff supports the recommendations in this plan with respect to PD zoning.
Okay. Seems straightforward.
It is.
Okay.
These are the industrial areas, which make up a huge portion of the non-residential properties in the Shady Grove area. There's approximately 3.3 million square feet of area that is zoned industrial. And these provide a variety of services. There's home remodeling and contractor businesses. There's manufacturing, there's flex office space, and there's also Class A and B office space located along Crabs Branch Way. And it too is broken up into 4 different areas within the plan. The first one being the WMATA rail yards and the Shady Grove transfer station. And the sector plan amendment recommends confirmation of their existing zoning, which is moderate industrial of 2.5 FAR. Council staff supports that recommendation.
Yep. For the rail yards. Yep. And the transfer station. Okay.
Exactly. The next is Oakmont Avenue Industrial Corridor. Again, this is a confirmation of their current zoning as moderate industrial and CRN zoning. And it's home to that variety of businesses, construction, remodeling, storage facilities, and biotech companies. Council staff supports that one as well.
Yep.
The next is the Frederick Grove Automotive Corridor. This one has also a recommendation to confirm their existing zoning. Appropriate. The plan says they don't anticipate significant changes in this area as these property owners have long-term leases on their properties and their existing uses.
And so the zoning is
It's moderate industrial of 2.5 FAR.
right. Okay.
And then the last of the 4 groupings of this industrial area are Crabs Branch Office Park. And it has a variety of biotech, industrial flex, and office space. There is a little bit of change in zoning here that rezone the office property at Calhoun Place from the industrial moderate to the CRT zone. This permits a conforming building and the rewrite the property had been made non-conforming. Rezone an office building at Standish Place, Calhoun Drive. This one is just to retain their industrial moderate zoning at the same FAR, but at a slightly more appropriate height. And then it reconfirms all the other properties in the Crabs Branch Office Park to industrial, moderate industrial zoning of 2.5. And that seems straightforward. Council staff supports the planning board's recommendation.
Okay. Okay. Looks good.
Okay. We're moving into the section on housing now. This has gone through the land use and zoning recommendations. And as with most of the sector plans and master plans, not only are there specific land use and zoning recommendations that affect housing related to either percent affordable or however, there's also a general housing section, usually with more broad sector plan wide recommendations. And in this one, it requires 15% of MPDUs as the highest public benefit priority for all new residential development. It makes a recommendation that publicly owned properties, and it included WMATA under this umbrella, and the language is should encourage to provide up to 25% MPDUs. It recommends increasing housing located within walking to metro, providing incentives to encourage development in large amounts of affordable housing. Another recommendation to maintain and protect existing residential neighborhoods in the Durwood area, provide a range of housing types based on housing size and family needs.
And why don't I suggest you unshare your screen now?
Oh yeah, sorry. So just for context in the staff report, I just included that in the Forest Glen Montgomery Hills sector plan, there was also a WMATA property. The recommendation in that plan was to require 15% MPUs under redevelopment of the WMATA property at the Forest Glen Metro Station. There was a county-owned property, so those have different recommendations and are thought about differently in prior plans instead of grouping WMATA with public because they aren't quite the same. For the completely public property in the Forest Glen plan, it recommended 30% affordable units, 15 as MPDUs, and 15% to households earning below 50% of AMI.
Needless to say, that property was not encumbered by massive expenses relating to infrastructure and parking requirements and everything. So it made sense that we could set a higher bar for affordability because there wasn't already a high bar set on the infrastructure.
Right.
But unfortunately, that gets to the core issue we've debated is it's a little different. Councilmember Joando wanted to make a comment.
Yeah, your last comment notwithstanding, Mr. Chair, I think we should be aiming for that goal of higher affordability, particularly on public-owned land. I would like to see that second bullet, in addition to council staff's recommendation of the floor, that we be consistent with what I proposed in the Forest Glen Metro Station and a couple of other places in the Veers Mill plan, that we do encourage to provide up to 30% of MPDUs, with 15% being at the normal level and 15% being at households earning below 50% of area median income. Again, it's not the details of the transaction will obviously be important, but I think we should be setting that encouragement and setting that bar. So I'd like to recommend that we would do that in that second bullet of the plan.
So you're saying raise it from encourage 25 to encourage 30?
Yeah, with the breakdown that I just said for the publicly owned land, which would be consistent with what we did in other places. But obviously, if the finances are impossible, but I think, as we started off this meeting talking about the tax abatements and other things, I think we should be setting that as a goal. So that's what I'm recommending.
But we could draw a distinction here between county property, WMATA and non-WMATA, essentially. I think that would be kind of more consistent with, what we've been working out.
We could.
Yeah, I'd be supportive if we just added a bullet, keep it as it is, and then add a bullet for county-owned public, for county-owned properties, and then have the 30. Encourage 30%. Obviously we control the property, so as stated by Councilmember Joando, the deal dictates that to maximize the public benefit. But setting that as a goal is appropriate, would be consistent, I think, with what the committee has done previously.
And we might actually even get it if HOC, for example, wanted to go after this, which is a strong possibility, I think, for at least for county land. Maybe they'd go after a metro, but they are we're creating this production fund that they could leverage to do a lot more projects, and maybe somebody else would compete for it too. I mean, at that point, I think you're talking about a mission-oriented developer. You're not. It could be done through public-private partnership, but it is functionally it's a mission-oriented developer. And it's doable. It's definitely doable.
And I'm fine with adding this extra bullet if that's fine, if that's a good compromise for you all.
So it would be an additional bullet that specifies for county land we're looking for 30, 15, and 15.
Yeah.
All right.
And just for me, that's the floor. Obviously, I know for some that might be a goal. So, but yes, I think for this that would be. I think we could have agreement there.
I think we all want to maximize affordable housing to the greatest extent possible. The question is how much of the subsidy impacts the broader affordability of all the other units. But
right.
Where that math works out and what the impact is, more art than science for each case by case deal, and setting an expectation to attempt to get as close to that as possible and exceed it when possible, I think makes sense. I think in the case, as the chair noted, with the HOC fund that we've been working on and that, possibility, it could exceed, certain goals because of what HOC is able to do, the bonding authority that they have, the creativity that they're able to implement, and the fact that, they're set up in order to do that. So anyway,
And let's not overlook that this plan uses the legislation that the council passed, that I authored, that allows for master plans to set higher MPDU rates, and it seeks to apply 15% as the highest priority public benefit for all new residential development. So we're going for a higher number, not only on public land, but we're going for a higher number on private land.
Is that an offer to, you want to bump that up a little bit even more?
No.
Okay.
No, I'd like to actually get some housing too. But I think that's notable. 15% MPDU, if we can get it on private land, that's quite a delivery.
Yeah, and I just think it's important to remember, I think it's important that we find the right number, but we also have to remember that the MPDU program is not a public subsidy, it's a everybody else subsidy.
Yeah.
So, we are driving up the cost of housing in order to make it inclusive housing, which is a critical goal, but there's a threshold at which you are denying a certain person from accessing a market rate unit in order to allow somebody else to do it, and finding that appropriate balance is difficult to do. And so that, we'd all wish we could have more affordable units, but we need more units in order to have more affordable units. So I think this is a good compromise.
Well, I think I won't dive into the ins and outs of the MPDUs and how the prices break in and what the profits are. We could have a long debate about that, but I think here we all are. It sounds like we're in agreement about adding the bullets. So I appreciate that.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay, should we move on?
Let's move on.
Okay, we are now at the section on parks, trails, and open spaces. This section has been organized around, I think it's 4 goals for the area, 5 goals. The first one is to create a network of activated parks that facilitate social gatherings in the metro neighborhoods and at the Grove. So this is focused on those neighborhoods. It has that which is included 1 acre neighborhood green at the Jeremiah Park property, a 1 acre civic green at the WMATA property. It's a 3/4 acre neighborhood green on the Grove Shopping Center. And those are the recommendations related to this goal. Council staff supports all of those.
All right.
And just to note that they are also contained in the land use and zoning recommendations in some fashion. They're referenced there as well, so this is all consistent. The next goal is to prioritize acquisition, development, and programming for new parks. And it makes recommendations related to Durwood Station, to Shady Grove Crossing, Piedmont Crossing Park, talks about a roadway extension at Crabs Branch Way to Amity Drive. Those first 2 pieces we discussed in the work session as they related to park property that was near the Washington Grove. You did have testimony from Washington Grove in support of potentially doing solar facility, community solar on the Piedmont Crossing Park property. And at that point, in the last work session, the committee was supportive of adding language that was broad, that it would not preclude that the park was definitely only being considered for recreational activities or only considered for community solar, but leave the language in the plan very broad so that whatever the future use of that park property is, it could accommodate either active recreation or solar or both. And so this is just a second place in the plan where some similar language is present, and I think we would just make this language, these first 2 bullets, consistent with what the committee decided at the first work session.
Okay. Sounds good.
The third goal is to create a robust trail system of natural and hard surface trails. Rockville did weigh in on this part of the plan and recommended that there also be language that just speaks to encouraging connections of any trails in the park system or in the plan area, that these be connected to other trails in the cities of Rockville and Gaithersburg, which I think is a useful bullet we can add to this section.
Okay, good idea.
The next goal is enhancing existing parks and open spaces. And there were recommendations related to Bluebill Hill Local Park, and maintaining the recreational uses at Redland Local Park and establishing a park and bike trail there. And council staff supports these recommendations.
Okay.
And then the fifth goal was to protect historic and cultural resources. The plan recommends exploring the potential legacy open space designation of a heritage or open space resource for the American Society of Plant Biologists property. And it's really just a recommendation that they look into what could be the potential for preserving this property. It's a little bit open, but just allows that as a possible future recommendation.
Where is that?
It is in the Crabs Branch Office Park area. I don't know if the plan had, I don't believe the plan had a photo of it, but I could be wrong.
Is it like an open space?
No, this is actually a 20th century colonial revival manor house that they're thinking of looking at, and I guess it has associated grounds.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. So the next prominent section of the plan is on sustainability, and it has several things that it covers, which is forest and tree cover, impervious area, water quality, greenhouse gas modeling, air quality, and noise. The forest and tree cover area and impervious surface provides numerous recommendations related to how to improve basically forest, tree cover, and to reduce impervious surface area, since those would be big proponents to help achieve better sustainability within the plan area. It talks about native plants and green roofs, green features in landscaping, prioritizing environmental public benefits for tree canopy and energy conservation, and promoting site and building design. The city of Rockville expressed interest in asking for a tree canopy goal of 50% in the plan area, which matches their tree canopy goal. This plan didn't actually put in a percentage requirement or goal for tree canopy. Currently, there's a 41% tree canopy in the plan area. We also know this plan area has a lot of surface parking that's going to get redeveloped. Because the planners and the board didn't suggest a certain percentage of tree canopy, council staff supports necessarily not putting one in. I think there's enough challenge with some of the redevelopment that will occur in this area. So I would leave it more flexible. There are a lot of recommendations that I think any reviewer of an application at the planning department will see how to, per site, encourage the best, most sustainable development that can occur there. I don't know that we necessarily had to put, need a requirement of a percentage of the tree canopy.
Yeah, I'll turn to you in a sec, Will. Yeah, I mean, it's notable. Rockville is at 50% as a municipality, but it includes a lot of residential areas.
Right.
I don't think that is, unfortunately, or fortunately, it doesn't matter. That's not the case here, right? We're talking about a lot of industrial area, a lot of commercial area. So it would be hard to make industrial like a neighborhood where there's trees planted everywhere. Okay, comments. Councilmember Joanda.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, understand the difference in the type of area. Also, saw Rockville's. But when you mentioned, Ms. Dunn, that there's not, you recommend making it more flexible and there's not necessarily a percentage. I thought I read, the 41% of the plan area has tree canopy cover. That's currently.
Right, that's just a statement. That's about the current tree canopy cover in the plan area is around 41%.
Okay, so for example, even though this, I know your suggestion here is leave it flexible, but you could say, for example, okay, we want to keep, it has to be 40%. You could say you want to keep it around that level, for example.
You could certainly say no net loss of tree cover or something like that in the whole plan area,
Yeah.
But
yeah, well, that's what I'm asking. Is there a way to get to that? I certainly don't want to, lose tree cover, canopy cover. You know, like I don't think any of us would want to do that. Understanding the development needs, is that a workable thing? I mean, and anyone can chime in on this. I'm just from planning or anybody. I'm just asking the question.
Right, I'm happy to have planning staff address it. I mean, the only thing I would say is number of bullets that address sort of the environmental issues. You could add a bullet related to your canopy. Again, I would make it plan wide, like an encourage or a goal, rather than doing anything related to any specific property, because I think that would be.
That's the issue. I
Right.
think. Right.
Okay. Well, could someone from planning say? I mean, is that plan wide? Is that something that realizing each property is going to move forward in a different way? Is that something, if we put in here, that you all could adhere to in the approval processes and try to take that holistic view so that we're not losing tree canopy?
Yeah, this is Carrie. I see Steve Finley, our environmental planner, is here to speak, so I'll let him go. But I did think we tried to sort of, as you described, Councilmember Joando, have a holistic approach. So we're really trying to look at the tree cover, but we're also trying to look at all the other elements that we can put forward in the development review process, and keep it a little bit open, so that, let's say, if an applicant wants to propose something that's innovative and it relates to other types of sustainability, we have that option available to them. So Steve, I see your camera's on if you wanted to add anything.
Sure. Hi, Steve Finley with Mid-County Planning. While we don't have it called out as a bullet on page 82, we do talk about the fact that American Forests recommends 40% canopy as a goal to strive for maintaining a sustainable environment. And we do note that through the recommendations that we should be able to maintain that 40%, approximately 40% where we are right now. So we could call it out as a separate bullet, but as you've noted, the most of that 40% exists. We're looking at the larger planning area, which includes a lot of the old established neighborhoods. As
Right.
you were noting, a lot of those neighborhoods is where the bulk of the existing tree canopy is.
Right.
And I think everybody's recognized that we're focusing in this plan on areas where we want to develop areas that don't have much tree cover, and we want to create fairly compact, dense tree canopy. So trying to apply a particular figure to an individual site is challenging.
Yeah.
We do mention the 40% in the discussion on page 82 of the plan, of the draft plan.
I appreciate that, and I also don't want to just gloss over the other, I think, really strong recommendations to create, shade cover and green roofs and the other things within the any particular site. So I think those are good as well. All right, I think I'm fine with. I see that on 82. I think I'm fine with the general thrust of it. I just wanted to state that. I know people, we're all concerned about that, and don't want people to be alarmed to, the 5 or so who are listening today, that we're going to take the tree cover. So, all right, thank you.
I see. So it's millions who listen to every other committee, but it's 5 people or so who listen to the FED committee.
Yeah, I'll just point out the Councilmember Joanna's favorite committee has millions watching from home, but our lowly
Okay,
committee
all right,
over here
all
only has
right,
5.
all right.
But I think it's important that we highlight this. But I think the plan broadly is turning asphalt into places. It's turning large surface parking lots into housing and into vibrant communities. And so I don't want to lose sight of that. Obviously, the broad tree canopy is a critical issue to create livable, sustainable communities, and I think the plan does that. But largely we're talking about the redevelopment of current dated properties that are mostly surface large surface parking and uses that don't serve modern communities and the needs of our current residents. I think it's important to raise that.
Okay, let's keep going. Oh, Sydney, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did want to point out that of the 5 people who are watching from home, 4 of them, council members, are on this call. So that in itself should be noted. But thank you, and I certainly am in agreement with the 50% goal, or that would be the mark. But I also think we need to keep in mind is what happens if someone does come in with community solar, and how that can fit in to this. I mean, we're talking about an industrial area, and whether or not when they redevelop, whether or not there's a way that they could utilize the parking lots in a way that they have not used the parking lots today in a sustainable way. So I think we do need to be flexible. I think we need to have a goal, but I do think we need to keep that in mind as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Sydney. So again, page 82 says American Forests recommends a goal of 40%, and the sector plan recommends preserving existing green infrastructure wherever possible, extending new tree canopy and green spaces through the areas. So, I think we've outlined, we know that we have strong policy agendas on this issue, that's for sure. So, okay, thank you.
Okay. The next section is on water quality, and again, the plan area includes portions of 3 of the Rock Creek sub watersheds: Mill Creek, Crabs Branch, and the South Lawn tributary. The water quality can be improved by minimizing impervious surface developments, preserving and increasing forest and tree canopy cover, as we've just discussed, and treating stormwater runoff and stormwater management facilities. And the recommendations they provide in the plan are basically to do all those things: to minimize impervious areas, to use native plants that require less water and fertilization, and increase forest and tree canopy cover. So again, all these things work together, and council staff supports these recommendations.
Okay, good.
As part of this plan, it was something that was required after the 2006 sector plan, but there is a requirement to do an estimation of greenhouse gas emissions from projected development, and include that in the plan. It does have that. And again, if you think about this plan is about redevelopment and about development, so it basically does come up with an increase in greenhouse gas emissions for that redevelopment. But given the nature of the plan, that's not surprising. But what can't get quantified, and what is also noted in the plan, which is important, is that the type of development that will occur through this redevelopment and the associated biking and walking and pedestrian facilities, it will work together. And so there's a high chance that even though the units as estimated might produce more greenhouse gas emissions for the plan area, the quality of the plan area could improve as well. And so it may not be quite such a big change.
All right.
It's not a recommendation.
Thank you.
The next is air quality and carbon emissions. Again, these are also related to the built environment. And there are numerous recommendations related to building design, facilities for walking and biking, plants, native plants, and then access to a lot of different facilities. And all of these things are listed here to support improved air quality and emissions. And council staff supports these recommendations.
Great.
Okay, the next is noise. And again, the plan notes that given the industrial nature of portions of this plan area and for some of these large properties in the CSX tracts, noise is something that is mentioned in the plan as an environmental feature that needs to be addressed and considered, and has recommendations for how to address those noise issues in certain properties as they redevelop, and council staff supports the plan's recommendations.
Okay.
All right. Historic resources. We discussed a lot of this when we talked about the different land use and zoning recommendations, but the plan did go through. It lists all the historic properties. It had a recommendation that lists the Durwood Store and Post Office in the master plan for historic preservation, and that has already been, I think that was supported by the committee. There's been rezoning for that property. There's also a recommendation to remove some properties that were listed in the 2006 sector plan for inclusion in the locational atlas. These 4 properties are the Durwood Baptist Church, Durwood School Hall Store, and the Hoskinson Schwartz House. And council staff supports the removal of these given the information in the plan. And there's also a recommendation to install interpretive markers in the plan area related to different historical events and history, and that those markers would be placed at the Durwood store and other places. Council staff supports these recommendations.
All right. Good. I don't think we have a lot that we need to necessarily re-go over or, talk through until maybe we get to the schools. So.
Okay. Well, we're close to there. Community facilities are next. If you want to move forward, we've already discussed the fire rescue property, the vacant property. So that facility has been discussed. As far as like the library, there is a development application that has been approved that has mention of implementing a library at the Shady Grove Station West Side. So hopefully as that plan moves forward, there will be additional library facility there. The 2006 sector plan recommended that a community center was possible in the community and refers to that in the CSP property and suggests exploration for co-locating that recreation facility with other properties or other facilities. And then lastly, there is like public schools. Rockville did weigh in on this, the public school facility discussion. There was a recommendation that potentially new development could be served by an elementary school site that is in the city of Rockville, just over the boundary from the plan area. Council staff notes that whether or not the school system decides to address any future development needs of school students through a school in the Rockville city area or elsewhere in the county, it's really the school system's decision. They create those boundaries, they do that analysis. And so it's not necessarily relevant that it's in the city of Rockville versus Gaithersburg versus the plan area. What I would note is Dr. Orland helped, he and I went through and we looked at the potential development and potential student enrollment that the plan evaluates and looks at. And we looked at the students coming out of the school site at Jeremiah Park that has been approved as part of that plan. So if that moves forward and that development occurs, we get that elementary school site, there should be sufficient eventual and future capacity for schools in this area. But again, some of this, there's a discussion of whether it should be this cluster or that cluster. It really does boil down to the MCPS gets to make those decisions, but area-wide, there is capacity.
Yep. Okay. Appreciate it. Hearing from Rockville there, but I understand the comments that are coming back here from council staff. So.
And that pretty much concludes my part. We can move to Dr. Orland's part of the.
Why don't we do that? Thank you, Pam. Thank you for this great review. Appreciate it. And we still got a whole nother big bite here. So Glenn sent us a nice memo, and we will now get into the transportation element.
Thank you. A couple things first. First of all, because I'm sort of challenged here in terms of the technology, I've asked, I can't really share screens from here, but Jessica is willing to do that for elements of either the plan or the transportation appendix. There are a couple of times you may want to look at things in there. And so thank you, Jessica, for doing that. The other thing, just sort of a prefatory comment, there is a lot of stuff in this packet, but I want you to make sure you understand that everyone who commented on this plan, whether it's DOT or the public, the city of Rockville, myself, agree with most of what's in here. I mean, the bike recommendations, the sidewalk recommendations, even the road recommendations, which are primarily narrowing existing roads or changing roads to make them more bike and walk friendly, and also to achieve some Vision Zero goals, are all supported by everybody. And so in the interest of time, you're still going to need some time, but in the interest of time, I want to try to identify those items which are, there's a different recommendation from the final draft, but I don't want to anyone get the wrong impression that the plan is not a good plan. It's an excellent plan. So just as background, starting really on page 2 of the plan. Also, we're joined in this section by Patrick Reed, who's the lead transportation planner for the planning board. Hannah Henn, who's the deputy director for transportation policy for DOT. I believe Andrew Rossi from DOT is also on the line. So they're there as resources as well. you may hear from them. Anyway, going to page 2 of the packet, the first thing we usually look at is land use transportation balance. You might recall in the SSP discussions that was delivered last summer, the planning board had made recommendations as to how to do land use transportation balance in master plans. The PHED committee decided not to take it up during the SSP time period, to take it up after, because you had a pretty full plate. You had Mr. Priest remembers how many work sessions were held. It was dozens. And so it was done actually by the PHED committee on December 9th. And on top of page 2, you see 5 bullets. These are the measures that you agreed should be used in looking at balance in master plans going forward: accessibility, travel times, vehicle miles traveled per capita, non-owner driver mode share, and low stress bicycle accessibility. However, it was also understood at the time that because there were plans that were underway prior to the council making the decision, that there wouldn't be data really on all of these things for these plans. And so we don't see this data really for this plan, nor will you for the Ashton Village plan you'll be taking up next month. But for subsequent plans after that, they will have this information. So what I've done here is to take the pre-existing way of looking at land use transportation balance to see if the Shady Grove plan is in balance for that. And for that, we look at the intersection congestion and how in the long term at build out, and how that compares to what the standards in the growth and infrastructure policy, the GIP, has. And those standards are as follows. Actually, this master plan or the sector plan area is really kind of 3 different areas. The area where you've been concentrating your land use discussion, in fact, all the land use discussion, has been in the Shady Grove Metro Station policy area, the red area, right around the metro station. But it also includes an area south of there, south of Indianola Drive, which is, there's no change in land use that's being proposed. It's strictly just an area which is not within the city of Rockville, so it had to be covered by a plan. And it goes down to south of Goody Drive. And also a large area to the north of I-370 along Shady Grove Road and Redland Road up to Mid-County Highway, which is part of the Durwood policy area. So there are 3 different standards. In the Shady Grove Metro Station policy area part of it, the standard had been 120 seconds per vehicle, but you changed it in the GIP to basically say there's no standard. So congestion.
Glenn, very important point here. I think we had agreement not to call it the GIP or the JIP.
Oh, what are we calling it?
I don't remember, but it's not that.
Oh, it's not the JIP. I know, definitely not the JIP. But
yeah.
Okay, well, I'll call it the GIP from now on. Okay.
Okay.
Meanwhile, you get consensus as to what
very important issue.
Okay, the GIP. Thank you. So anyway, there's no standard anymore for this metro station policy area. Congestion can just be as high as it is. In the Rockville, the area to the south, part of the Rockville City policy area, the standard is 63 seconds per vehicle. That didn't change in the GIP. And the area in Durwood, the standard is 59 seconds per vehicle, which didn't change the GIP. So there are 3 intersections. I'm going to the top of page 3 now. 3 intersections that failed at least the old test. One was Shady Grove Road and Crabs Branch Way. However, with the not auto driver mode share that this plan recommends, it's no longer an issue. In fact, because there's no standard anymore, this is in the metro station policy area, it's not an issue anyway, but it doesn't even rise to the 120 second per vehicle, the old standard. The Shady Grove Road 355 intersection also failed the 120 second test per vehicle test. However, with the higher mode share that assumed in this goal, we'll talk about that a little bit later, it still falls short of the old standard. Again, you don't have to do anything because there's no standard anymore. However, in the transportation appendix, parking planning points out that there are 3 operational things you can do at an intersection which do not involve any widening. Basically, it changes the lane assignments for the existing lanes that are out there, and also gets rid of, it changes the signal phase of the intersection. And that would make it consistent with at least the old standard of 126 per vehicle. I know that, the council has said no standard at all here, but if you want to try to keep, basically do those things which keep congestion from getting too high, which don't involve any widening, then I would recommend actually including those items in the plan, which are literally removing the split signal phasing, converting the eastbound Shady Grove Road's lane configuration so that it's 2 exclusive left turn lanes, 2 through lanes, and 2 right lanes, exclusive right lanes. There's 6 lanes now. It just changes how they're assigned. And converting westbound Shady Grove Road's lane configuration to 2 left turn lanes, 4 through lanes, and 1 exclusive right lane. There's 7 lanes in that direction. This would just change in 1 or 2 cases what each lane is supposed to do, but it doesn't widen the intersection. So I guess that's my first recommendation, is that you include putting those operational changes in the plan.
That seems to make sense, but I do worry. This is like a 20-year plan, and isn't it possible that an operational change that works today might not work in 10 years? And does it have to be a requirement? Can we just, talk to us about that? And let's get some.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, one of the things you could do, and DOT may want to weigh in on this, but you could say that you could just acknowledge in the plan, right now it's in the appendix, but in the plan, that these 3 things could address, bring the intersection down to a point without actually making any recommendation. That's
Exactly.
I agree with you. That'd be a better recommendation.
All right. Wow. Well, my work is done. Okay. Any comment here from planning or DOT?
Okay, the next one's kind of a biggie. The existing master plan has an interchange, a grade separate interchange at Goody Drive and 355. And this is an area that is outside the core. There's no land use being proposed here. The land use that you see out there is what you're going to get for a long time. It's mostly auto-based uses.
So
yeah.
I think we were just doing the land use, and I think we just confirmed that that's where the automotive corridor is. And I think, and we just confirmed the zoning. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah, that's correct. So, exactly, to your point, we just confirmed that what you see there is what you're going to get for purposes of this plan. We're not contemplating a different land use there.
All right. So, the standard there is 63 seconds per vehicle, but the forecast of park and planning is that in the morning the congestion will be more than twice as much as that, 132 seconds. And the PM be 85% worse, be 117 seconds. So it fails. The planning staff looked at 6 alternatives, 3 which would keep an at-grade intersection but would add a bunch of turn lanes, and 3 others would grade separate one way or another. The only one of those 6 that actually would meet the 63-second standard is the plan that has been really more or less the concept for a number of years, which is that Goody Drive would go over 355. So the east-west traffic on Goody Drive would be essentially free flow, but any traffic along 355 would still have to go through an intersection with the Goody Drive traffic that wants to turn onto or off of 355. And there's a diagram of that on there is a diagram of that in the packet. I'll find it as I go through. I'm sorry. The plan also, the 2006 plan also, remember, had 3 stages of development, and each had triggers. And one of the things that the council added really at the 11th hour was to say that this interchange was necessary before you could go to stage 2. So the planning board is recommending not taking the interchange out of the plan, and also, of course, then getting rid of that interchange as a staging element in this plan. The DOT says it's not necessarily their preference to build an interchange there. They think it's premature to take this out of the plan, particularly because of the recently announced managed lanes preferred option from the state that would build a new interchange or a connection point for toll-paying users of the 270 express toll lanes at Goody Drive, as well as, of course, buses that would get on 270 there and use those lanes. And because there's really been no modeling done, which would look at how much more traffic there'll be on Goody Drive going east-west through there, that would make that intersection operate even worse as a result of that. The city of Rockville, in their master plans, says that an interchange here is still possible. The city was clear that it did not want to have the interchange anymore be a staging element, but they didn't come out and say automatically that it should come out of the plan. They were sort of vague on that. But they did point out that the Rockville Planning Commission, is developing an update to the Rockville plan, says this is basically about the worst intersection in Rockville and has a lot of congestion. And they really do not agree with loosening the standard here. The planning board's recommending taking the interchange out, adding some turn lanes, or actually adding free right turn lanes at a couple of locations at this intersection, but also loosening the standard to 100 seconds per vehicle. And again, Rockville is opposed to that. They're opposed to loosening the standard. They think 63 seconds is high enough. DOT would, in addition to saying that it's premature to take the interchange out, they actually would like to see the interchange remain as a staging element in the plan, at least until this is resolved with the state. My recommendation is actually leave the interchange in, but the interchange concept as shown it's on Circle 12, I just found it. And if Jessica, I don't know if you could show this or not, it's in the packet on Circle 12, or it's also in the transportation appendix. And again, it would carry Goody Drive over 355. There it is. And the pink in the east-west in the middle there is the overpass we're talking about. It's actually a relatively short overpass because if you remember, Goody Drive from the east is already pretty high up, has to go over the metro tracks and the CSX tracks. So it's just a matter of actually carrying it a little higher and continuing that over 355 and then coming back down on the west side. And it would come down on the west side short of the entrance to Comcast and to the MCPS facility. The cost of this is about $27 million. This is still a planning number, so we don't have obviously anywhere near a final number. The plan talks about the interchange being $75 million, but that's really if 355 were to go over or under Goody as opposed to this. This concept, again, is the only one that actually brings the intersection standard, meets the intersection standard. It improves the traffic even on the 355 direction by 30% in the morning southbound and 10% in the southbound in the evening, 6% in the morning going northbound. It would reduce pollution at the intersection compared to the no build. The data is shown on bottom page 4. It would actually help the BRT on 355. BRT in this area is a single lane reversible plan, is the current concept. It's one lane southbound in the morning, and that lane, and in the morning, the northbound BRT would run in mixed traffic. So in the morning, if it's 6% less congested, then that helps the BRT by 6% in that direction. In the evening, it runs northbound in the special lane, but it would run in mixed traffic going southbound, so it would actually help its travel time by 10% through this area. It also, the only downplay of this is that it actually doesn't do any good for the northbound traffic in the PM, in the evening. The current congestion that happens there is merely moved further north to Indianola Drive and King Farm Boulevard. But recall, in those areas now, you don't have a standard. Congestion is fine there. And so it takes the congestion out of an area where congestion is still considered to be an important point, and into an area where it really doesn't matter nearly as much. So my recommendation again is to keep this in the plan, in this concept in particular, but also recognizing that this would probably be a state project. In fact, in the past, not the most recent letter, but in the past Executive Council priority letters, it's been one of the items we wanted the state to plan and to build. And because it's a state intersection, the State Road 355, it would be a state project. And so it wouldn't be a county cost. The impact would be very, very minor. There's only the planning of this shows like 3 strip takes and no full takes at all. Wouldn't take any businesses at all. And the city of Rockville is concerned about any interchange that might have a large community impact. This would have very, very, very little community impact. And also, because this is an area really, where we're encouraging a lot of walkability and bikeability, there's very little of that here. And remember, this is, again, an area where there's no change in the land use. So what you see right now is what you get. And the transportation appendix reports there's only 38 pedestrian crossings. This is pre-COVID. At all, if you take all 4 of those legs of the intersection together over an 8-hour period during the workday, and fewer bike connections than that, compared to up at Redland Road or King Farm Boulevard, where it's considerably more. So that is my recommendation. And I guess the other 2 related recommendations, one is not to reduce the standard or loosen the standard from 63 to 100, which is what, again, the city of Rockville also agrees with not doing that. And finally, though, agreeing with the planning board and the city of Rockville that this should no longer be a staging element. What we're talking about here is improving east-west travel through here, getting people from Aspen Hill and from the east side of Rockville and from towards the east of Aspen Hill even, over to I-270 and the managed lane, or even over to the Great Seneca Science Corridor area with less delay. Improving the delay on 355 isn't as important because of what's happening just north of here.
Okay.
And so it really has nothing to do with the interchange, with the ability to develop Shady Grove. So it should no longer be a staging element. And with that, I'll stop. Sorry, there's a lot to cover.
Okay, so we, timing wise here, it's 10 after 11. I would think we want to break by 12 for the executive's budget presentation, but
Mr. Reamer, I think we were told that we have to break by 11:45.
we have to break by 11:45.
Yeah, so we have less time than that. We have like 35 minutes.
Okay.
But that's what I heard just before the meeting, unless it's changed.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't think we're gonna. I don't know how we do the housing bill today, unless we break now. So I think we should just probably go ahead and do that. Why don't we just get a quick? Yeah, I think we're gonna just break now. Then, if we have to stop at 11:45, I'd like to go ahead and do that housing bill. We can come back and we can start here. Hopefully we can finish this plan in half an hour, 45 minutes. And we'll all have a chance to brush up on this particular issue in the interim. All right. Okay. We're going to stop on this plan here today. Apologies. Thanks to everybody who's assembled. And we're going to turn over to the next item on our agenda. All right. So, I think we're waiting probably for Christine. Hello, Ladine.
Good morning or good afternoon. We're
Almost.
at that new.
Yes, you're a very forward-thinking person, I can see, but we're not quite there yet.
This is true.
It's really only 10 o'clock if you don't take
Yeah, exactly. Inside. Okay, good. So, why don't we, while we catch our breath, Christine and Ladine, why don't you catch us up where we are?
Sure, and I just want to thank Christine or Ms. Wellings for giving me the opportunity to just jump in. I am going to just do a brief summary of what we did on March 1st. We have several amendments. I'll start with the first, and then I'll turn this over to Ms. Wellings, who will handle the remaining if we do have enough time to get through the remaining. But just as a recap, back on March 1st, it was a 3-0 vote to amend the bill to allow a tenant to sign and date that there is a child under the age of 10 in the property that occupies or may occupy. And if that is so, the landlord would be required to install a window guard. So that amendment, go ahead, sorry.
Please remind us what page, where are you in the packet?
Sure, I'm on page 3 of the packet.
Okay. All right. Okay, summary of first work session. Got it.
Yes.
Okay.
So page 3, sure. On page 3, just looking at the first paragraph there, committee did agree to amend the language to allow a tenant to sign the lease or addendum acknowledging whether or not there's a child under the age of 10. So that was the first amendment. Any comments there, or should I continue?
I think I just want to make sure this is not an issue from Fair Housing. I mean, I know it's not, but this is not. Why isn't this an issue with like Fair Housing or anything? People have to disclose whether they have children. It's not a concern. You can just say it's not a concern. It's just in the back of my mind.
No, and that's actually a good question, right? Whether or not a landlord would discriminate because someone has a child. In this case, this is just to identify whether or not the parameters of installing a window guard is important. This is not denying housing, right? So if a mom, wanted to apply for an apartment and was denied because she had children, we'd be looking at something different. This particular is looking at whether or not the age is applicable to do an installation of the window guard. So unless there was some other...
Is there any other way in which a tenant is required to disclose if they have children or not?
Yeah, so specifically in my case, where I've worked on a couple of lead paint issues, if there's a child under the age of 6 that's in that property, the landlord is required to comply with some federal, state, and local laws as well. So that's one scenario where they would disclose that.
Okay, but that's the landlord, not the tenant. I don't know here. I'm just assuming that everyone has thought about this fair housing question and that it's not an issue. I just wanted to ask the question because it would be, I guess it's my understanding that a prospective tenant does not have to say whether they have children or not. And it would sort of seem that this is a departure from that because now they have to swear that they do or don't have a child who will occupy the unit.
Yeah, and I'm happy for housing to jump in, but just as a practice, what it's known is, in a lease, you would list all the occupants in the property.
Okay.
So that's standard.
Well, it's not after you sign, though. Okay. Any comments here from anybody? I don't know. Yeah, Andrew.
Yeah, I'm not concerned, I guess, about the disclosure. The one question that I had, and I think, we've been trying to follow other jurisdictions like New York City, which I think the sponsor has highlighted, which I think makes sense, so that we're doing things that have been done to keep people safe, which is the goal here, which I really appreciate. Is there a concern that if there's a landlord, if the landlord cannot pass the cost on, I mean, the cost is relatively minor, I will admit, but that the cost, not the presence of a child or family, but the cost could be a reason not to rent, a legal reason not to rent. I want to avoid not renting to a family, like that being a dynamic. I think we all want to avoid that. I'm just wondering unintentionally if the idea is you can't pass along the window guard cost. I believe in New York there's a one-time ability to do that, but not ongoing, and perhaps that, when I saw that, was to prevent the potential discrimination against a family, which would be used. So I just, it's related to your question. That's only why I raised it here, but that would be more my concern. I just wanted to note that and make sure that we deal with that today. And I know the sponsor may have thoughts and comments there.
All right. Why don't we parking lot those two questions, and let's come back to them after we've continued to work through the bill. Great.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And then so still on page 3, just reviewing what the committee had amending lines 30 to 31, which would include the ability for DHA to approve a variance or have some type of variance process through regulation. We do understand that there's some windows that may not fit the standard window guard, And for that reason, we would give the authority for DHA to make those variances, and that's what that amendment would do there.
Okay. Great.
Okay, moving along. I'm going to go ahead and.
Sorry, if someone was calling to speak, I missed it.
Yeah.
Oh,
Let me just jump in just quickly. So when we talk about the variance, we are talking about if there's a limiting device or something, because beyond that, DSCA does not have the expertise in deciding what the variance could be. So I mean, we can offer extensions in terms of putting these limiting devices. So we just want to be clear that when we talk about variance, we'll have to consult with the DPS or the fire marshal office what we're talking about in terms of variances, and that could be part of the regulations.
Okay.
And Chair, I do believe that Christine will talk about an amendment that possibly would extend the definition of window guard to include or limiting devices. So we'll get to that too for further discussion.
Okay.
Okay, so turning to page 4, I am going to just kind of fast forward to the current amendment that we left off, and that is number 1, whether to require annual notices by landlords to tenants. Now, the committee did have some discussion about this, and we went back and spoke with GHCA to talk about what was the best practice, what was the best thing, and not to overburden the process of including additional notices. Now, we do recognize that OLL in New York support annual notices, but with AOBA's amendment, along with GHA's support, the better practice was to do it at the time of lease signing, at the time of lease renewal, and at the time of increase as well. We felt like that was more in line with the practice, and the amendment would be to amend the notification for it to include it at those specific timeframes.
Okay, I think that makes sense. Comments from colleagues or the sponsor? No.
Nadine, can you repeat those? It's lease signing, lease renewal, or the rent survey? What was the third?
At the initial lease signing, if the tenant is renewing their lease,
right,
and any rent increase notice that would be given to the tenant.
I think at the last work session we had mentioned that the annual rent survey might be an opportunity to let people know about the availability of window guards and their rights under the law. Is that another one that fits this frame of our existing operations, not adding a new requirement to DHCA's and the landlord's responsibilities?
I'm going to ask DHCA just to jump in, just to make sure that that's in accordance.
I mean,
remind us, please, what the rent survey, that is a notice, tell us, describe that for us.
So in terms of the rent survey, annually we do the rent survey, and typically we send out the request sometime in April, but then those rent surveys come at a staggered time. And in terms of if you want to really streamline this, our suggestion would be to do it either at the time of lease signing or renewal of the lease, or the 3 things that we mentioned. I think in terms of making sure that these notices are going out at the right time, it will make sense the way we have made the recommendation.
Personally, I agree. I think it's not even just streamlining. I think it's effectiveness. I think we're inserting it at a point where the parties are actually engaging in a transaction. And so everyone's noticing what they're doing. And I do worry about a piece of paper that comes in the mail and it's just one of many things, that kind of doesn't get the focus.
I personally, I agree with all that, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Please, yeah.
I agree with all that. I was not suggesting in
lieu of.
Place of, yes, right. But in addition to, but right. If it, whatever,
it could be added,
whenever the landlord and the tenant have a conversation is the most effective time.
Absolutely. And you've suggested a different amendment requiring DHCA to do an education campaign, and that would be an appropriate way potentially to conduct the education campaign.
Agreed. Yep.
Councilman Jordan.
Generally agree with the thrust. I guess DHCA question. so we're talking about delivery at the time of, or notice at the time of signing, right? In those three instances, could you just restate them one more time, Ludine, just so make sure I'm clear?
Sure.
Please.
So 1 at the time of initial lease signing, 2 at the time of lease renewal, and then 3 at the time of a rent increase.
Okay. So I would just, and I think DHC, maybe you can speak to this. I think that makes sense. The cultural competency and who the deliverer is and how it's delivered in the languages, just could you talk about, that piece of how you already deal with those issues and with this, how you might incorporate this notice into that regime?
I mean, typically there's like a lease summary at the time of lease signing. So we will include something about this bill within the lease summary. So that will be one avenue when a person is signing a new lease. And then of course, once the person has signed a new lease at the time of rent renewal, then the notice, could go out again.
And that is done in multiple languages?
I don't want to misspeak. I was trying to see if Rosie could answer that question. Dan, do you know if it's done in different languages?
I believe the lease is in multiple languages, and that would be something that we could look at as well, just to make sure that this addendum is included in multiple languages.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's important. Just, it's already an overwhelming time for many, and want to make sure that something related to health and safety like this is, again, stands out and is understood and not seen as a penalty and, go down the list. Okay.
We also have other means. We have like tenant rights, signage, it could be added.
Correct.
Yeah, that's important too. Okay. Thank you.
Great. Okay. All right. Sounds like there's general agreement on, would it be the amendment is in the packet here. I guess it is all of that, isn't it?
Yes. So, continuing on page 5, and then just to make sure there's clarity there, not only the notification, but follow up by the landlord. So in the event, and I'm thinking this will have more on a minor scale, if the tenant, and I'm on top of page 6, if the landlord does not receive a signed notification within an appropriate time, and in the bill it's put as 30 days, that the landlord would have the opportunity, with consent of the tenant, to inspect the property. So this is basically on the follow-up if the notice is not signed and acknowledged.
All right, let's talk about that second piece. It has the potential to be a little bit invasive here. Any comments on that follow-up requirement? Andrew.
Yeah, I do think it's a bit invasive. It's also seemingly a big administrative burden for a relatively targeted issue. I mean, most people don't need it, may not respond because they don't need it, and we'd be creating the requirement of inspections for, the vast majority of units that aren't the ones that we're trying to protect here. So I think if possible, a second notice
Can I ask,
for those who haven't responded would be.
Let me ask, sorry to interrupt you, but how does this work in light of our previous general consensus that it's lease, and renewal and so forth? If we shift away from the outbound notification, what is the? I mean, I think we're assuming that the tenant has not missed it because it's required to be part of a form that they sign off on.
Right. If it's at the lease and lease renewal, then I don't think that the follow-up would be necessary. And I don't mean to cut on Ms. McCartney Green, but I think, in light of that amendment, that you likely wouldn't need a follow-up except potentially in the circumstance of the rent increase notice. I don't know if the rent increase notice, already requires some type of acknowledgement by a tenant or not. I don't know if DHCA can speak to that, but it might be that you could just eliminate this whole follow-up section.
Can you talk to us about the rent increase notice?
I mean, I'm sure that the landlord, when there's a rent increase, gives some kind of a notice to the tenant. And at that time, if this information is obtained from the tenant, then the landlord should have this information.
Okay, I guess, so those who get an increased notice are tenants holding over, is that right? Because otherwise, I mean, you can't just send a notice, like, you gotta have a lease that gets signed.
I mean, if it is an annual lease, then the rent could be, changed on an annual basis. If it's a
do you mean like if you had a 2-year lease, and that 2-year lease, you're entering your second year, and you had agreed to a specific increase allowable as part of your 2-year lease, you get a notice at that time of increase. That's what that notice might be.
I mean, isn't it more the former that you were saying, that it's a tenant holding over, it goes to month, and an increase in rent, there are notice requirements as part of that in terms of the way in which that can happen, where the tenant isn't signing the lease, they're receiving notice of the rent increase. Because if it's a lease, both parties have to sign it. It's a contract.
Okay. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Here with me. Got a couple.
Go ahead, Dan.
I can see Rosie over there with Dan. So Rosie, could you please speak?
Okay. Can you hear us now?
Yes.
Is it better? Okay. Go
Okay.
ahead, Rosie.
I'm sorry. Okay. If people sign a lease, on the lease signing, you should be notified about the window guard issue. And then annually. So if they want to renew your lease, they should send you that notice about the window guard. Even if they don't want to renew your lease, if they're going to let you go month to month, they should still send it. And if you sign the 2-year lease, although you won't get a renewal notice in the middle, they should still send it. And that's something that we can write into the reg.
So first of all, we can continue to require outbound notices that tenants can request them. That sounds like something we want to do. The immediate question is, we've generally shifted to this, we're inserting this into the transaction time, and a tenant's going to have signed off. There's a subpopulation that this won't apply to for some time, because they're in a multi-year lease or they're month to month. And so it'll be a few years before they maybe sign a lease. And for those individuals, how do we want to handle that? They would be receiving notice, and as proposed, they would be required to sign that notice and return it, I believe. And then the landlord would be required to inspect a property and determine if there might be children living there, and then install, if I understand it correctly.
Okay, but if I'm month to month, then whenever the regulation goes into effect, send me the notice and just mark it so that every year you're sending it at that time.
Right. Well, I think that's sort of
Yes.
Yes, I think that's the question, is do we want to say, keep sending the notice, or do we want to have a requirement to inspect? And personally, I think it would be wise to not force inspections here, but let's see what my colleagues have to say. Will?
Just wanted to ask, I'm forgetting if we included this inspection because some other jurisdiction did it. Could you just, Ms. McCartney or Ms. Wellens, remind me of who does or does not do this, New York or New Jersey? Or I remember talking about this at some point. Do you all remember?
Yeah, I can jump in here. So New York does have the inspection. Just want to make sure I'm clear so I can turn to the packet. And it may be actually in an
okay. Well, while you're looking, I mean, I think just look at that. But I'll say this: I think the goal of it is to have, the safety is paramount, and you want to know, say, to the point I made previously, there's a lot happening at lease time. Maybe you didn't see it. Maybe you don't understand. Go down the list. I think the way this is written, and we could certainly change it. It says with the consent of the tenant. So it's not anyone's coming into your, house or your property or your domicile without your consent. I know that's an issue in rental properties just in general. People get mad about that, and I dealt with that too, people just coming in. So I think if there's a consent process and it's for health and safety and other jurisdictions are doing it, I think it would be good to leave it in there because we want to, make sure that these things are on and people understand. And if they're not acknowledging it, they might not understand, they might not be on. So go ahead, Ms. McCartney, maybe you have an answer to the question now, or Ms. Wellens, whoever.
I would say, I think that's an interesting way to look at it. I don't think that's the language of the law. The legislation is a requirement to investigate. So that would seem to override it, but I don't know.
Doesn't it say with the landlord must at reasonable times and with the consent of the tenant inspect the dwelling unit to ascertain whether a child 10 years of age occupies the unit and if the approved window guards are installed correctly. That's how I'm reading it.
And that's correct. So it would be with the tenant's consent. So without that consent, we'll talk about a little bit later whether or not liability should be shifted in terms of if the landlord has done the onus of the...
Yeah, that's a separate question. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But at this point, with that consent piece in there, tenant is engaged in the process and not an over-obtrusive without their permission.
And then the question of determining that consent, there's sort of practices in DHCA could devise through the implementation of the regulations what that means. I mean, is it just the first notice that you got? If you send multiple forms and, I don't know. I don't even know what the contingencies would be. But
am I missing something here? If the tenant is acknowledging and consenting to the inspection, wouldn't they be acknowledging that they are aware of the ability to get window guards if they have children in their premises? Like, I'm not quite sure. The idea that they would, the issue is not non-responsiveness, right? If there's response, then there's acknowledgement that it's happening. So I'm not sure then what the inspection is doing at that point. Are we then expecting the landlord to come in after communicating, confirming that the person understands what they're being asked for, then going into the property and then seeing if they can find children and then assuming and guessing what the age is if the tenant won't share that? I mean, I'm just not sure what problem we're actually trying to solve here by creating inspections if the goal is to ensure that a tenant is aware of their right to have a window guard installed to keep their kids safe. I mean, that's the goal here.
Well, I think we were talking about the lease case. It's pretty clear, but if there's an increase, we just said there's three situations: the increase in rent, the lease being up, and I'm forgetting the third again. But that they would need to be notified at each of those points. And so if you're not, sometimes a rent increase is just they slide the note in the door, it's in your mailbox, or and so I think there has to be some affirmative acknowledgement at that point is what we're trying to guard against. And that's why I was saying, is this something, and if Ms. McCartney, is this in the New York law? Can we just confirm that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So, I mean, go ahead, Rosie.
But I'm sorry, but the consent part is not. The consent part is not in New York.
Okay.
Just the inspection.
Clear.
Just the inspection. So they can go on without consent.
But can we be, I mean, we had a whole conversation in the last session about how we didn't think that it was appropriate to have landlords or, management companies or whatever go in and try to guess the age of children. Like that was a whole discussion that we had. Now we're saying that after receiving acknowledgement of this requirement and the right to have a window guard to keep children safe, that we want tenants to then have landlords be able to go in and inspect the premises for children and ascertain the age of the children in some form or fashion, either by guessing based on how they look, which makes me uncomfortable, or by presumably being on site inside and asking the kids and asking the parents, which seems pretty intrusive to me. I mean, the goal here is to keep people safe, to have an awareness by the tenant to know of their ability to have the window guards installed to keep them safe. I just don't really understand what the point of an inspection would be, particularly when you have to get consent for the inspection, which would be an acknowledgement and a communication that we want to facilitate to ensure that the tenant is aware of their right to have the window guard installed by the landlord. It seems like we're creating an additional step to place a significant burden on both sides that doesn't really solve the problem that this effort is intending. But that's just my, you know.
If I could just, Miss McCray, Moody McCray.
Okay. I think they should be notified annually, and the landlord should check to make sure that everything's installed correctly, that they haven't jiggled it out of place or whatever. But I don't think it should be the burden of the landlord to figure out how old the children are. You should tell them. I mean, if you want your children to be safe, you should tell them this one's 7, this one's 5, this one's 2. They shouldn't have to guess.
Right, but
I think it's an unfair burden of the landlord to try to figure out how old the children are. They should check it every year just to make sure it's installed correct.
Okay. So then, yeah, because that's a good point, Rosie, because there are two provisions here. It's in this clause we could separate out. One says, are there children in there? Which I do agree, you shouldn't have someone guessing the ages of children. But the second is, if so, that it's installed correctly, that it's there. And so, I mean, I do think there's something here that needs to be addressed. I don't think we should remove it. I think there are situations where there's going to be lack of clarity, or at some point in time in those 3 times where you have to do the notice, that someone's not going to maybe understand, and I think having the inspection serves some sort of purpose. But I want to hear from others, but I don't think we should just throw it out. Does the bill sponsor? I guess, Tom, do you have any view on this? Not to put you on the spot, but I
forget. I mean, we wrote this so long ago. I know a lot of thought went into it, and it was intentional to be there. Does DHCA envision remind me how DHCA will a landlord will get the written release of responsibility from a landlord from a tenant that a child doesn't live in the? Is there a form?
Yeah, they'll get an annual notice. Isn't that what the law?
It'll be incorporated in the annual notice. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, Mr. Council President Hucker, if I may. I mean, the way that the law is written, based on your prior decision to incorporate it into the lease, so it'll be in the lease, or an addendum to the lease, and that would presumably carry over to the lease renewal situation as well.
Right.
And then, so this is the situation of, you've been notified of a rent increase, and what does the notice look like, and then what is the follow-up required there? So you could go what we had contemplated patterning after New York would be that there would be a checklist provided to the tenant. The tenant would indicate the ages of their children and sign off and send that to the landlord. But then there's the question of, if the tenant, for whatever reason, does not send in the notice, are there any follow-up requirements from the landlord? So there was the option of the inspection with the tenant's consent, or simply a follow-up notice, or you could have, a third option would be, none at all, because the landlord has, taken numerous reasonable steps already. So that would be another option. No follow-up.
I guess, no, thank you for reminding me. Yes, for those tenants who are covered at lease signing or lease renewal, that's pretty much a cut and dried situation. They're having a face-to-face conversation or a phone conversation, and they're able to talk about it's. Just remembering back, I think Will's exactly right. When I was a tenant, they just tell you, you get a notice under the door or an email or something saying this is your new rent, and there's no back and forth where a landlord is getting any additional information from you. So, for those people, I appreciate the idea that given that the inspection would have to be on the consent of the tenant, that would be the opportunity for the tenant to stipulate that a child lives here or a child doesn't live here. I think it would be good to have I'm okay on giving up on the inspection requirement as long as the landlord has more of a requirement to do, a second notice, as you mentioned, or other things. I think landlords are all in different places, right? Some are small family landlords with very little. Some are very professional management companies that are in touch with all their tenants all the time. I'm a little more concerned about the ones who rarely talk to their tenants. And maybe a tenant is in a 2-year lease and almost 2 years goes by before they find out about this requirement. So I don't know. I mean, I'm okay, as I said, removing that for that bucket of tenants, as long as the landlord has more burden to try to do their due diligence to try to contact them.
So it'll be a second notice. Yeah. I mean, this group of tenants will phase out,
Yeah.
What % of our tenants are in 2-year leases?
Not many.
No idea.
Most tenants sign annual leases. A few sign 2 years.
Fewer than 50%, sure. Right. Okay.
Andrew.
Yeah, I think DHCA had the right approach here. Inspections for those that have already been installed to ensure that they're safe and installed properly. That is the key here. It's, having the right to have something that doesn't help you doesn't help you. So, that seems reasonable. We're not talking about tens of thousands of these most likely. We're talking about a relatively modest number, but life-saving for those where they're needed. And then having a second notice requirement for those, that don't acknowledge receipt, they're as the sponsor has noted here, but eliminating the inspection requirement where you're asking a landlord to go into somebody's home and guess the age of their children. Yeah. That just seems, well beyond what any intention here was. And I think, that would be consistent with what the bill sponsor has just noted. So that I support that. It sounds like there's agreement here. Anyway, I think that distinction I think is really important. The inspection is for the annual safety and proper installation of the actual window guards themselves. And then a second notice for anybody that doesn't respond to the first notice.
Okay. I think we have consensus here. We have a number of other items, but I think they may all be easy. So let's proceed and keep going until we get kicked off by technology.
Okay, Chair Reamer, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Ms. Wellings, who's going to walk you through the remaining amendments.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So the second issue is during the first work session, you had discussed a transition period and for once the bill goes into effect, how long after that would the landlord be responsible for an initial notice, and how long would it take DHCA to come up with sample language for the landlords? AOBA had suggested that to give sufficient time for the rollout of this bill, that the effective date should be October 1st, 2022. DHCA has suggested an effective date of January 1st, 2022. So, with and DHCA can obviously speak more to that, but I believe the idea is that would give them sufficient time to really sufficiently develop the materials that are needed for landlords and to educate landlords about this new requirement.
Okay. You know, I'm reminding myself, this seems a little confusing now that we are notices to a subgroup, you know, but I don't know how we do it differently. So, okay, I'm looking at the legislation, so I don't know if anybody wanted to speak here, but we have an amendment to this. I'm
I
hearing.
read it was that you can, just to give the landlord time to acquire the equipment and then get it installed.
Yeah. No, I think the
And for us to get the regulations out.
yeah.
So
I'm fine
all
with
up.
the DHCA suggested effective date there.
And it will provide us, sufficient time for the outreach and educating the landlords to be getting ready. What is really, required under the law or regulations will be ready. So I think January 1st, 2002, timeline, would be preferred from our point of view.
Okay. Tom, you've got a hand up. I don't know if that is current or not, but
I think it was no longer current. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry.
No problem. All right. So we have a transition period, and how do we do it so that we do it as DHCA has recommended?
So for the DHCA's recommendation, we'll simply put, we'll simply add the effective date to an uncodified provision. So that'll be very simple. And then if you want to do an additional transition period, saying, first notices have to go out within, 60 days, you could do that, or simply don't include this potential language of the transition period that I have there. Just have the effective date of January 1, and then it will be phased in depending upon when the lease is renewed. So
I'd recommend we do the date and let DHCA, manage all of these specific implementation timing questions. So, okay, I think we have agreement there. Not seeing disagreement. Okay.
Okay, moving on to page 7 of the staff memorandum, there are several technical amendments that the county attorney's office had pointed out, which I assume are without objection, but please let me know if you'd like to discuss those.
Without objection.
Potential exclusion of condominiums. You had discussed this somewhat, I believe, during the first work session, but weren't able to get into the details. I believe that the sponsor can correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that the intent, from the outset was to apply to the multifamily dwellings, not necessarily the condominiums. You can see that New Jersey does not apply its laws to common ownership communities. And AOBA has expressed opposition to excluding common ownership communities, given that this is a safety issue. And DHCA has provided some additional information that there are over 10,000 rental units within condominium buildings.
Okay, let's take this one up, Tom.
Sure. And I think there's.
We have less than 2 minutes, so
I think this is an area that I understand there's an argument on each side of it. Kids fall out of windows no matter whether it's a multifamily apartment or a condo, and they're in grave danger, mortal danger, and that's what the bill seeks to avoid. I understand the idea of excluding condos because we really regulate multifamily more, and because the tenant has less power in that situation where they're renting. But the fact is we require parents to keep their kids safe in many other ways as well. So I tend to favor broadening the bill, covering condos, and so does AOBA. So
I don't understand the don't include condo thing personally. I don't know where. So is it in the bill? It's not in the bill? Has anyone proposed it?
I think it's not in the bill, and I think originally it was out of this. In the original formulation of the bill, we were focused on, well, let's let's focus on landlords. Tenants don't have any say in the matter, and parents that own a condo do. But regardless, kids need to be safe. That's the real point of the bill.
Well, and I think now that we've shifted to lease renewal, maybe that had something to do with it. I don't know. But, it's an easy enough thing for any landlord to include in their process.
But I mean, I also think, look, I didn't know anything about this, and we've had multiple kids fall out of, apartments in my district alone, much less in the county. So if I own a condo for the last 10 years, how would I even know these things exist unless the county government takes some pains to educate me about, the fact that they exist and my responsibilities?
So the bill is before us, it includes common ownership communities.
Correct.
Yeah.
And we are not going to amend it otherwise. Councilmember Jawando shaking his head.
I thought it was the opposite of that, but if it is in the bill, as I thought it was not in the bill, we need to add it. But if it is in the bill, I'm for keeping it. So whichever is true, I'm for it.
All right.
Yeah, I apologize. I might have mischaracterized it when I teed it up. So
You gotta go,
I think
folks.
that's my fault.
I think we have consensus on that. That's the last probably difficult issue. We'll have to bring it back for 5 minutes to finalize all those other amendments, but we're basically 99.9% done. We're going to lose the feed, and then we won't be an open meeting anymore, so we can't do that. Okay, thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you all. Really appreciate it.